Hello BookTube and welcome to Weekly Reads. This Friday has been both exhilarating and deeply trying. I got a package in today that from Libris. I ordered some books. One of the books I got in today I will show you in what I'm going to be reading this weekend and into next week. So I ordered it like 2 weeks ago, on 2 weeks ago Wednesday, and I was supposed to get the books this Tuesday, but it ended up being passed around various regional postal distribution centers in North Texas. Like it was in Abilene for some odd reason for like 3 days, and then about a day in Fort Worth before it finally got to McGregor. So that's kind of frustrating week, and then the exhilaration of getting the book. And then after I opened the box and put the books up, the little globe I have. So there's this globe here. I have one on this shelf here that I use to bookend the new arrivals before I do my book haul and put them in my library catalog and then shelve them. For some odd reason, it fell and cracked, and and then I had to do something with the toilet, and the lid on the toilet broke, or the tank, so I had to order that in, or a new one, and I'm like, ugh. And then the garlic did not want to cooperate when I was cooking. And also, I need to cut my hair, so that's one thing I will be doing this weekend. So anyway, yeah. But I did get quite a bit of reading in, and also some viewing. So let me talk about what I've watched and what I'm planning on watching before I get on to the books. So this past weekend I watched The Defenders, or finished off The Defenders. I'd watched, I want to say, the first 3 episodes like a month or 2 ago, and then didn't come back because I finished off Iron Fist and then started on The Defenders. And then I watched a few episodes, and then I kind of, let it sit for a month maybe, and then came back this past weekend and finished off all the rest of the episodes. And the first 3 episodes, maybe 4 episodes, are quite weak, but once the story gets the action starts to pick up, and it kind of gets better towards the end. Although the writing is a bit wonky at times. So after The Defenders, I watched Our Planet, a nature documentary miniseries on Netflix, narrated by David Attenborough. Of course, every nature documentary is narrated by David Attenborough. Except for Nature, I think that's F. Murray Abraham. But anyway, which was quite good. Very interesting visuals. And then after Our Planet, I watched, I didn't watch anything until yesterday. Last night I watched The Sunshine Boys, by the film adaptation of Neil Simon's play, starring Walter Matthau and George Burns, and it was fantastic. That movie is amazing. Quite happy I watched it. And I read the play a few years ago and quite liked it too. So, anyway, there was an anthology of, I want to say it was like best plays of the 70s or something. I've been trying to hunt it down, the anthology, because it had The Sunshine Boys by Neil Simon, and I'm blanking on the name of the other play I remember it having. But anyway, and it was pretty good. My favorite of the plays. Yeah. And so tonight I think I'll probably watch the night nature documentary that Netflix did, because I think it's only a few episodes, so I should be able to get it this weekend. And if I do, I might on Saturday, or when I have a free time, probably watch either Edge of Democracy or Circus of Books. So that's the film plans. Moving on to the books, I read Guest House for Young Widows by Azadeh Moaveni. This was an ebook. It was for the BookTube prize, and as such, I can only say I read it until the end of May, when I will do a wrap-up of all of the BookTube prize books. From there, I started on Still Crow Saga by Paul Krueger, and I did not get on with this book at all. I bailed within about 100 pages. It just, elements of the world building kind of annoyed me. How, well, there's a tendency in Asian-inspired fantasies, of which Still Crow Saga is one, to basically make, if there is an antagonistic society, that society, it will almost always be based upon Japan. And it's, yeah. And Krueger also has a tendency to over-describe, over-narrate. And just, yeah. So I bailed. And I'm very disappointed. I mean, definitely I think a sign that either I'm falling out of love with science fiction and fantasy, and I think I know why. As I read more and more history, as I hunger for more and more history, when I read fantasy, how the world building and how the deployment of history and historical influences increasingly annoy me, increasingly try my patience. So, yeah. So I think I'm going to take a few months break from reading science fiction and fantasy and see if maybe distance and time reignite my love for the genre, or if, this is a more permanent break. Even though that said, I still want to write predominantly science fiction and fantasy. So, yeah, make of that what you will. So, in addition to bailing on Still Crow Saga, I read a few books of poetry. I mentioned last week that I read a few books, or I borrowed a few books of poetry through ebooks from my library. I had read Undercurrent by Rita Wong, and there were a few that I was going to start. So I wrote them down in my list of what I have been reading this year, so I don't, flub on names. So I read Feast by Tomaz Salamun, which was quite good, very enjoyable. Winter's Journey by Stephen Dobyns, which was, I had some issues when I read it, but then I came back to it and quite enjoyed it. It was really good. Scribbled in the Dark by Charles Simic, which was fantastic. And I listened to Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur on audiobook. and I thought it was interesting, although I don't think audiobook is for me, ultimately. I don't think it really works for me. So I also read in the Critical Tradition, edited by David Richter, The Life of the Medusa by Helene, which was actually quite good. I think her argument sort of falls in on itself and collapses towards the end of her essay, but it's really interesting reading. Not terribly written. And I also read 2 issues of National Geographic. The December 2019 issue with Under Jerusalem as the cover story, which I really loved every story in this issue. Especially the one on Jerusalem. Let me show you the cover. And which was very interesting. Also, there's one on plastic and tigers. It's a story of tigers in captivity in the United States, and it does mention the now infamous Joe Exotic a little bit. Oh, yeah. And there's also a very interesting story on saving Africa's parks. Too, that was phenomenal. About this NGO called Africa Parks. I think it's the organization that various Africa Park or African parks that various African governments contract with to take over management of national parks that are threatened by poachers, and how they sort of turn the parks around. And I also read the January 2020 issue focusing on, well, it's a special issue called The Future of Medicine, and the cover story is dealing with pain, which was quite good. Some of the other stories in this one I don't think didn't quite work for me. But there's an interesting, excuse me, an interesting story on the microbiome menagerie, which has some pretty cool images of various microbes. Oh yeah. Anyway, so that was all I read this week. And now it's on to what I will be reading this weekend and the following week. So, the first thing on the agenda, and the book I have been waiting to get in that batch of books from Alibris, is Catch and Kill: Lies, Spies, and a Conspiracy to Protect Predators by Ronan Farrow. So, yeah, this will be the only book I read in hardcover from this group of, or in physical copy, from this group of the BookTube Prize. And after I finish Catch and Kill, I will try to read a few books that I'm planning to add to the Revisit project. Mysterious Skin by Scott Heim, which I think I read as a senior in high school, was when I read this book. It came out in 95, I think. And The Master of Go by Yasunari Kawabata. I read this book, I want to say about 10 years ago. Maybe a little bit sooner than that, or more recently than that. But quite enjoyed this one too. And if I have enough time, or if I'm just really in a yin for more history, I will be reading rereading the Franco-Prussian War, the German conquest of France in 1870 to 1871 by Geoffrey Wawro. This is one of my favorite works of history, and I am very much excited to reread it. So that has been my weekly reads for this week. I'll be back on Monday with a new video. And until then, have a great weekend, and thank you, BookTube, and stay safe.